I've spoken to a certain president who I like, actually, a past president, former president. He said, I wish I did it. I wish I did, but they didn't do it.
Was it George W. Bush?
No.
Was it Bill Clinton?
I don't want to say. I don't want to say. Because
Barack Obama.
a member of a party, I don't want to get into who.
Okay.
I don't want to get him into trouble.
Donald Trump tells a lot of stories that he says come from this friend or that friend. They're always about some complaint he's promising to fix or some compliment that he wants to enjoy. And they're always, almost always, impossible to corroborate. Except that one you just heard, because unless the president was hallucinating a conversation with one of the many dead presidents, there are only 4 living presidents who could have possibly said that, and all 4 are saying, not me. Joining us, senior writer at The Dispatch and MS Now contributor David Drucker. So lots of outlets have called these 4 presidents or representatives for them, and the denials have all come in. Can you help me understand why Donald Trump would tell a story like this that's easy to corroborate?
Well, Katie, you're giving me the hard questions today.
Sorry.
I can't explain why the president says half of what he says. The other half I can probably explain, but I mean, I don't know. He's both a former president and a current president, so maybe he was looking in the mirror when that conversation happened. I don't know. By the way, as an aside, I mean, there's so much that he could talk about. Obviously, people will disagree. There are strong feelings about the war. A majority of Democrats oppose it. A majority of independents oppose it. But a majority of Republicans are supportive. And there's a lot he could talk about in relation to the war that could make a very good case for why he launched it and why we're involved in it. And he ends up on these sidetracks. And I was just noting how Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu talks about the war as something that's going to require determination. It's not going to be easy, but these are our goals. And, the president likes to talk about everything as though it's all easy and there's nothing wrong and nothing to see here. And obviously, when you're in a war, there is, but it doesn't mean, by the way, again, people can disagree. A lot of people do, but it doesn't mean just because it's difficult or things don't always go perfectly that it's the wrong thing to do. But it's the way he looks at it, as though everything is always great and fine and easy. And it doesn't actually have to be to have voters understand that.
No, he doesn't seem to understand that voters can take a tough concept. And they want to be told the truth. Americans want to be told the truth about what's going on. They don't want to be coddled. They don't want to be lied to. And there is a difference between the way Donald Trump speaks about this war and the way Benjamin Netanyahu does. Netanyahu, by the way, enjoys a majority of support from all Israelis, not just from his party. Do you think, David, before we get to the subject of how they're selling this war, and I know you've been writing about that, but I wonder, the Joe Kent resignation, do you think that there are other Joe Kents around that might be coming out of the woodwork now that he's resigned?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'd love to know what Elbridge Colby or Tulsi Gabbard really think, because, they've not believed in Tulsi Gabbard's case. She doesn't really believe in projecting American power at all. Elbridge Colby has believed that the U.S. needs to pivot to the Asia Pacific. So I'd be curious, love to be a fly on the wall in their offices. But I don't know that we're going to see a lot of Joe Kent. I mean, Joe Kent's an unsavory character to begin with.
Yeah.
He ran a congressional campaign where him and a lot of his staff, or his staff at least, express anti-Semitic thoughts or comments. So, he's being true to himself on this issue. But again, most Republican voters and most Republicans in Congress are supportive of the war, believing that after nearly 50 years, diplomacy wasn't working and the risk of not doing something was greater than the risk of continuing diplomacy. And I think, for the normal Republicans in the president's administration, I mean, the sort of pre-Trump era Reaganite Republicans, and there's still quite a bit of them, this is the sort of thing that they're going to support conceptually.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that, other than maybe some low-level staffers that don't really matter, I don't know we're going to see a lot of this. But we could, and it depends on how long we're engaged in the war.
Yeah. Well, there's also a lot of America First folks. And J.D. Vance, there have been all sorts of leaks about what J.D. Vance really thinks that sounds suspiciously like they could be coming from the office or J.D. Vance
I think it's
himself?
pretty clear that J.D. Vance, this is not something he would have recommended or supported, wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
But when you're the vice president, I mean, he's free to resign, but that's not going to happen.
That's also a good point. Let's talk about the graft, though. The way that Donald Trump is using the war to fund his own political war chest. You've been writing about this. Explain.
Well, we often think of fundraising as major donors who write big checks to super PACs and max out checks to campaigns and things like that. But the mother's milk of the past decade or so, the real mother's milk of presidential politics and big time politics has really become the small donor who gives in small amounts, and you get, untold number of these sorts of donations. And it's a huge reason why the president has this nearly $500 million war chest spread among many groups within his political operation. And a few days after the war started on February 28th, right, a few days later, the email fundraising appeals based on the war started to appear, same as they've appeared for the past 10 years based on any particular initiative that the president is in favor of or policy that he's pitching. That's a little bit different and rubs a lot of people the wrong way. So the money is going into his political operation, which in theory will be used to fund Republican congressional campaigns or, maybe the Republican nominee in 2028. Obviously, Trump can't use it for that. But a lot of people don't like it because it just seems a cheap way of trying to profit off the war, if you will, even though it's not a personal profit. And those fundraising email appeals have continued. Some actually try and make the case that the Republicans who are critical are wrong. Some make the case that the Democrats are weak on national security and so on. But it's now a part of the rotation.
All right, David Drucker, thank you as always. I like that. Maybe it was him looking in the mirror and talking to himself. I had not thought of that. And you got a genuine bit of laughter out of me, sir. Thank you for that.
Anytime.